Hello and welcome to the latest Counterpoint podcast. I'm your host, Peter Richardson. And today we're going to be talking about developments in Europe, looking at COVID, what that's doing to the market performance, but also kind of looking at who might be filling the Huawei-shaped hole that's been left as Huawei's sales are beginning to ramp down following the action by the US administration in particular. And then also kind of looking at 5G and how that's shaping up and what we can expect there. And I'm delighted to be joined today by Jan Striak. So Jan joined us recently to head up our research in Europe. So Jan, hello, how are you today?
Hello, I'm very well, thank you.
Super. So let's get into this. So, you and I have met once, I think, and that was before you joined. And given the current situation with COVID, that's doesn't look like we're going to be able to meet anytime real soon. So, looking at how COVID is, developing, we had this sort of peak in the spring, then it kind of got a bit quiet in the summer, and now we seem to be into another peak. So, what's currently going on as far as you can see across Europe, and how's it impacting the market?
Yeah, it seems to all be ramping up again. So as you said back in, it all kind of started off at the beginning of the year, and then we had lockdowns being initiated kind of across Europe in March. Then initially peak of new COVID cases in April, but then it seemed as if the lockdown was kind of working, and we had declining cases, easing of lockdown restrictions around kind of July time. But then now, kind of as everyone's expected, with schools going back, universities going back, pubs reopening, all that kind of stuff. We've got the second spike, as it were, kind of going across Europe, and it's not looking great. I think I had a look at the latest case numbers this morning, and just in October, we've reached nearly 2.5 million cases across Europe. I know we're testing more, so that means there's obviously going to be more cases, but it does mean that governments has now started to take it a bit more seriously again. So we're seeing increases of lockdowns across Europe. We've had France declare a national emergency the other day. Spain has had kind of limited regional lockdowns, particularly in Madrid, and here in the UK as well. We've got a tier system going on, so most of the country is in tier 1, which means it's your standard social distancing, rule of 6. Don't meet more with more than 6 people. But then you've got tier 2 and tier 3. I live in London, and we've had a tier 2 lockdown, which basically means we can't mix with households indoors. We can meet outdoors, but it's just indoors we can't. And then there's some of the other cities up north. So Manchester and Liverpool have had a tier 3, which means kind of the most severe lockdowns. So it's not great. I mean, particularly I've got a newborn at home and a toddler, and lockdown was quite tricky back in at the beginning of the year. But it's not looking great now, particularly as the weather's turning. We're sitting here and I'm staring at the rain out the window, and lockdown in winter does not sound particularly appealing.
So thinking about the telecoms market or the smartphone market, so what we saw in the spring as these lockdowns came into effect, and I think we discussed this earlier. There was a kind of a big shock to the system, so sales dropped right off during that period, but then have bounced back. But are we expecting to see a kind of an echo of what happened in the spring here in the latter part of the year, or are we expecting to see sales kind of drop off, or are people a bit more resilient and expecting that to not really happen?
Yeah, I think the key thing is now is that so far shops haven't closed. That was one of the major things at the beginning part of the year, is that shops were closed, so people couldn't go and buy things. So far, shops have not been shut, so people are still going to be able to go out. And I think there's less of a, from at least what I can see, there's less of a panic this time around. At the beginning of the year, people were really panicking about the economy, jobs, uh, discretionary purchases were down. This time around, I feel it feels a little bit different, particularly now that we've just had the iPhone 12 launch, which always gives the market a bit of a boost. So that should help things recover a bit. I still think Q4 traditionally very strong, but chances are it'll still be down a little bit. Probably around 5-6% down on last year. So overall, we're probably looking at the year to be about 10% down on 2019. But I don't think it'll be quite as bad as earlier at the beginning of the year, and then we should see recovery through next year.
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly from what I'm seeing is that in the early part of the year, in when COVID first hit, there was a lot of support from governments across Europe for workers, so that they were trying to keep people effectively employed, whether they were actually working or on their sort of furlough schemes. So governments were investing in keeping people in work, but a lot of those programs are either winding down or being changed in some way so that there's maybe a little bit less support. So we have seen unemployment beginning to rise, and from a kind of a GDP perspective, we're also many of them are, most countries are actually in recession, structurally in recession. So you've got this sort of double whammy of unemployment rising, recession still impacting. So typically that has a big negative impact on consumer sentiment. And when we were looking at the smartphone purchase, it's by and large a discretionary purchase unless your phone is broken or something else has occurred. Not many are being stolen at the moment because not many people are out. But so there's a kind of a background replacement rate driven by those things. But otherwise, most people can say, well, I don't need to buy it this month. I can wait until next month or 2 months. So, are you seeing that the replacement rate has been in general getting longer just because of, uh, this sort of technology fatigue in a way, and this sort of COVID situation is perhaps making that even worse. Is that fair? Have we done consumer research that sort of looks at this?
Yeah, I think that is fair, and particularly over the last few months, it's always typical for the European market to have a bit of a slump just before a new iPhone is launched. Obviously, the iPhone very strong in a lot of European markets, so UK, Germany, France. So there's always going to be a little bit of a slump before a launch. So hopefully now that the iPhone's now launched, it'll come back. But one of the things that we are seeing is that okay, people might be willing to buy a phone or now upgrade, but potentially spend less. So, as part of some of our research, some consumer research, we asked people across Europe how much has their smartphone purchase budget changed due to COVID-19, and across Europe, there's a fairly significant proportion, at least 30% of people say that they're going to spend less on their next smartphone, and that's particularly the case in countries that have been hit hard by COVID, so Spain and Italy, for example, where between 55 and 60% of consumers are saying that they're gonna spend less on their next smartphone, and in those markets, 15% say that they're going to spend at least 30% less. So yeah, people are definitely tightening their belts, and yeah, overall economic worries are driving that.
Yeah, so that suggests, because I think it's fair to say that somewhere like Spain, the the average selling price across the market is a little bit lower than maybe the uh, midpoint for the rest of Europe. So, I guess what we could expect to see is the ASP in Spain shifting down even further, which implies that brands that have a solid offering in that mid-range are likely to do quite well relative to higher end type products.
Absolutely, yeah. And there's one particular brand that stands out in Spain, and that's Xiaomi. So Xiaomi first entered Europe in Spain, and was kind of targeting that mid range, well, kind of mid premium. They say premium product at a non premium price. So they and as you say, Spain is particularly fond of that mid tier, and in the wake of Huawei's decline across Europe, particularly in Spain, there's that vacuum that's been left, and Xiaomi has particularly made the most of it. And over the last year, Xiaomi has gone from something like 14% of the smartphone market share to 21%, and is now the second largest vendor in Spain. So yeah, there's definitely this market in the mid tier, particularly now that Huawei is seeing that decline.
So let's talk about Huawei a bit, because it's been kind of a major talking point for over a year now, really, in the market, since May 2019, when the first sanctions were applied, and those sanctions have been gradually tightened over the intervening, what is it now, getting on for 18 months, and applied both in the infrastructure sector and in the smartphone space. So let's talk about that for a bit. So what are we seeing in terms of market share for Huawei here in Europe?
So Huawei market share seems to be kind of dropping across Europe in most countries. It hasn't yet fallen off a cliff. I say yet because one of the reasons why Huawei is still kind of managing to maintain shares, they've built up quite a lot of inventory. So we're still managing to ship devices, and they're launching the Mate 40 series in the next few weeks. So they're still launching products, and they're still selling. But so across Western Europe, Huawei's dropped about 4 percentage points over the last year. Across Eastern Europe, it's a little bit more than that. So yeah, it's not looking great for Huawei in Europe, and obviously a major reason for that is that they can no longer ship new devices, at least with GMS. So you have they have their own app gallery and things which are doing pretty well, but particularly with the lack of the full Android suite, it means that they're slightly not as appealing, shall we say, compared to some of the other flagship products. And as then there's also the waning sentiment for Huawei as well. Consumers are slightly more wary of Huawei these days. So yeah, so that's kind of weighing on their market share.
Yeah, I mean, it's surprising actually in some ways how well Huawei market share has held up, and I think part of that is the way that Huawei's been very good at addressing the specific concerns of different channels, whether it's the operators or more open market channels across different markets in Europe, and that has seemed to allow them to sort of hold on to market share, perhaps at a higher level than one might expect when you consider the fact that many of their newer products don't have GMS, as you say. But we're sort of reaching the point where some of the things like the P30 Pro, which was a very successful product, is now looking a bit old, relative to many competitor products, which the P30 Pro did have GMS, and it's sort of has been one of the drivers of market share, but that's now beginning to slide off. So yeah, unless something changes, it doesn't look great, as you say. But we talked about Xiaomi a little bit. Who else? Which other players can make progress based on this Huawei-shaped hole that's going to appear across the region?
Yeah, so there's a couple more of the Chinese players that I think are pretty well positioned to make the most of it. So Oppo is the main one at the moment, from what I can see. And Oppo seems to be making quite a lot of strides, particularly when it comes to partnerships with operators. So last week or the week before, Oppo announced a couple of partnerships with Deutsche Telekom and Orange in order to stock their devices. Earlier on this year, they announced a partnership with Vodafone to bring a broad range of Oppo products across all of Vodafone's markets. So, particularly with the operator channel being so strong in Europe, making those deals is very important, and Oppo is really pushing for that. And then at the same time, particularly across Europe in particular, brand is very important, and particularly brand awareness. And until a few years ago, no one had ever heard of Oppo or Xiaomi or even Vivo in Europe. So Oppo are really pushing for that with a few high profile sponsorships of sporting events. So they sponsor Barcelona Football Club. They also recently sponsored Roland Garros and Wimbledon tennis championships. Obviously, Wimbledon didn't happen this year because of COVID, but it's still a signal of intent to try and get the Oppo name kind of out there. And I think they're particularly well positioned to do that. Vivo as well. They just announced this morning that they've now officially launched in Europe with a range of four smartphones, and then they're also sponsoring the Euro football championships. So again, it's that same kind of mix of trying to get the products in the channels, but also trying to get the brand awareness up. And it's that trio of Xiaomi, Oppo, and Vivo, I think, are the ones that are really going to be fighting it out for that vacuum left by Huawei.
Yeah, and I guess we also have there's a few other brands that are there or thereabouts. OnePlus has been in Europe for a long time, and for many years was sort of seen as the the rebel's choice in a way. How could you have a flagship type product without buying from one of the big names, and OnePlus was your opportunity to be a little bit subversive as a consumer and do that. Obviously they've become a bit more established now, but in certain markets they still do well. And then even more recently, Realme, which has again used Spain as its entry point into the European market. Really, in the last year, that's a brand that's come in fairly quietly, but is sort of making its presence felt in some markets. So there's quite a number of new Chinese players coming through, and then of course we've got Nokia, my brand that's very close to my heart from my history, albeit now run by HMD. So Nokia's got a great brand name, but has always struggled a little bit to make much headway in the smartphone market. Obviously, it's very strong in feature phones, but feature phones taking a bit of a backseat in Europe, for quite a number of years. So there's a number of players out there, but I think you're right that it's those kind of core Xiaomi, Oppo, Vivo, OVX, whatever you like to call it, that are likely to make the best of this situation. But we also have this other feature that's sort of driving a lot of the global market, which is 5G, and it hasn't really had that much impact on Europe. So let's wrap up the discussion by talking what we're expecting to see for 5G now, especially with Apple launching. So what are you seeing at the moment in terms of operator launches and rollout for 5G across the region?
So 5G it's not a new technology in Europe. It's been around for a little over a year now, and currently there are around 45 live 5G networks across 20 countries in Europe. Another 32 more operators in the further 13 countries have announced plans to launch. So the European 5G footprint is fairly extensive. There's most countries have 5G, and a number of countries there are a number of countries, UK for example, where all the operators have launched 5G. So in terms of rollout, it's very much there. The thing that we're not quite seeing yet, it's the uptake. And one of those reasons is that there hasn't quite been that broad choice of devices available. So in August, we saw 5G phones accounted for about 13% of total sales. Now, okay, that's up a fair bit from earlier on in the year, but it's still a little bit below where we'd expect the market to be for a technology that's over a year old now. Samsung's done pretty well in that. The Galaxy S20 family has done pretty well, and then there's been, we mentioned Huawei and Xiaomi and Oppo and OnePlus. They've all launched 5G devices, so that's all kind of helped. But the biggest, the elephant in the room really, but the biggest gap has been Apple, and Apple finally launched their 5G device last week, which is obviously great news for the 5G market. It's certainly going to give a boost to European 5G, because Apple has a very loyal fan base, and particularly in markets like the UK, Germany, and France, there's a significant proportion of the install base, 30 to 40%, have an Apple phone, and that proportion has so far remained untapped by 5G, which is perhaps one of the reasons why the sales have not been quite as strong as they could have been. But now that the Apple 5G phone is here, that means that all major vendors now have a 5G device in their portfolio. So the choice is now broadened. So I really do expect the market to pick up rapidly. So we had, I said in August, 13% of phones sold in Europe were 5G, but we think that'll grow rapidly to maybe 40% by the end of next year, and as much as 80% by the end of 2024. So now that the Apple 5G phone is here, that's certainly going to give a boost to 5G across Europe.
So, last kind of question from me, Jan. So, do you think that operators will, based on the launch of the iPhone 12, do you think that operators are going to get much more aggressive around 5G, particularly as we kind of, in the run up to Christmas, which is a traditionally seasonally strong period for Europe, or do you think that the Huawei factor on the infrastructure side, so the fact that operators are having to now kind of rethink about how they structure their networks based on the likelihood that, or actuality that Huawei won't be able to be used in various parts of the network. So I guess my question is, which is going to be the stronger factor here? Is it the ability to drive the market with Apple, or the fact that rollouts are going to be a bit slower because lack of Huawei infrastructure? Where do you see that coming out in the next few months?
Well, I think the Apple iPhone will certainly help. Yes, I know that 5G infrastructure issues are going to mean the rollout will be a little bit slower. So coverage rollouts may be a little bit slower than would have been previously expected. But the kind of issue that we have with 5G is that it's it was always going to be more of an enterprise play, enterprise and industry, particularly with manufacturing or robotics or autonomous driving, whatever. The consumer play for 5G has never been quite as strong. So the push to get people to upgrade to 5G kind of needs a little bit more, I think, than just here's what you can do with a little bit more speed. So Christmas is obviously, and Q4 is a good time to get some promotions going. So to try and get people to stump up that a little bit more to upgrade from 4G to 5G, I think is a good opportunity, with some promotions and whatever, to get that really give 5G a boost. But I don't think it'll be quite the same as when we moved to from 3G to 4G. That was a fairly major jump, and people really saw the benefits. I think 5G still needs a little bit more uh, convincing of the general population to kind of switch them over, particularly when this year we've seen quite a lot of spread of misinformation around 5G, which certainly hasn't helped. So the operators definitely have quite a bit of work on their hands to really push 5G along. But the Apple iPhone will certainly help.
Great. Well, let's look forward to potentially a 5G Christmas, but maybe not. So lots to look out for in the coming months. Well, Jan, thanks very much for your time today. It's been an interesting discussion. And for everyone else, hope you've enjoyed this podcast. And please check back for the next edition of the Counterpoint podcast. All right, have a great day. Bye now.